Robin Stefani, the
Ooh, loud.
Adam Garcia, Sonoma County Transportation and Climate Authorities.
Chris Barney, SCTCA.
Noah Houch, City Track. And we can do introductions via Zoom as well. I'm trying to see, are people participating via Zoom or observing?
So we don't have, no one notified us that they'd like to participate.
Okay.
The count is quorum.
Okay. We'll do Zoom introductions as people pop up to keep us on schedule.
And we do not currently have a quorum. We have 4 jurisdictions represented right now. So we can't take action, but we can, you know, if the committee would like to make recommendations that.
Okay, so thank you everyone for introductions. The next item on the agenda is would be I think adoption of the meeting notes, but and the agenda, but we don't have a forum. So that is an informational item today. Write your input to Mr. Barney for if anybody has any comments for adoption at the next. All right, great. And so we'll just jump right into item 3, Sonoma County VMT program. This is an action item, so I'm not sure how you want to navigate that, but we can decide that as we get into it.
Yeah, we can't take action, but you know, we can take comments on the presentation and the report. And I would mention, you know, I'll provide a brief introduction, and we'll have the team from Fair and Peers kind of walk through a presentation on where we're at. I sent out a link to the report, the draft report, yesterday. So that's available to review over the next couple months. You know, we've been working on this project for quite a while now, so we're making some good progress. So I believe Dan or Kelly was going to bring up the slide deck. So Kelly, please let me know if you're not able to share.
Dan will be sharing, so I'll let him respond if he's having trouble.
Yep, I need the ability to share.
Okay. Yeah, and while Dan's getting that up, so I'll just introduce the team that's been working on this. So Adam and I from SCTCA have been part of the project team. We have a team from Fair and Peers that's been working on this. So the lead over there, or the leads at Fair and Peers, are Dan Rubens. He's the project manager that's been leading the project for Fair and Peers. Kelly Bond has been a key player on the team, and then Ian Barnes as well, that who many of you know is also part of the project team. So the goal here is to come up with a way of providing a means for mitigating VMT impacts under SB 743 for projects that are determined to have VMT impacts under CEQA. You know, a lot of times those impacts are able to be mitigated on site, but many times they're not. So the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, OPR, who has a new name now, Land Use and Innovation, I believe, has recommended that a VMT exchange, banking, or fee program may be a way to address that. So we applied for a Caltrans grant and have been able to fund a study looking at potential options for Sonoma County for implementing some way of providing a means to mitigate those types of impacts off-site for those projects. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Dan to walk through the majority of the introduction for the draft report and the project in general.
Great, and actually it's Kelly. I'm gonna kick us off for a few slides here, and then I will pass it over to Dan. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see some of you virtually today. I know we've connected with a few of you on this project, so excited to bring an update to this group. So we'll just kick it off by talking about the project goal. So the primary goal for this project is to identify ways for land development projects in the county to mitigate their VMT impacts. And the VMT mitigation program would help to provide a more cohesive approach to VMT mitigation actions by expanding the actions to a countywide scale. And through this project, we had our own technical advisory committee, and we worked with city and county staff through that group. And then we also worked with a lot of other key stakeholders in the county to help shape the program and to get it where it is today. Go to the next slide. So here's a look at our project progress. You can see we're about roughly 2/3 of the way through the plan in June of 2025 here. We've met with the TAC several times. We've completed stakeholder workshops and interviews, and we have more recently drafted the report that you all have been provided. And we'll continue to update that report based on feedback that we get from you all today, that we get when we meet later on today with SCTCA's own TAC. And then also hosting a demonstration workshop that we'll talk more about later in the summer. We'll get feedback from that group as well, in addition to the board of SCTCA. Go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're just going to talk briefly about VMT in case some of you are maybe less familiar or just want a little refresher, and then we'll dive into the program. So vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, is a measure of the total amount of driving that's happening in an area. So it doesn't matter how many people are in a car. If one car drives 10 miles, that equals 10 VMT. If 4 separate cars go 10 miles, that's 40 VMT, regardless of how many people are in the vehicles. And recent changes in state law, as Chris mentioned, have required that cities and counties are now using VMT to evaluate new development. Go to the next slide. So how does VMT get reduced? It can be reduced through a combination of different strategies that are listed here on the slide. It could be at the project level through site design, and local context plays a role in that. At the community level through improvements to public transportation and infrastructure that can help shift travel behavior. And at the regional level, using things like land use planning and large-scale transportation projects can help contribute to long-term reductions. And the program for mitigation that we're working with SCTCA to propose falls under that regional and program measures section there. Go to the next slide. Okay, so now just talking a little bit about the different program options that were considered. So there are several ways to mitigate VMT through different programs. They're categorized as capital improvement services or programs. Those are 3 different buckets. And then there's different program types you'll see underneath, bank, exchange, or fee-based, and some apply to certain types of projects. So for capital improvements, that's things like physical infrastructure, such as a transit service expansion. So you can see in the photo there, trying to illustrate a new route that might have been added based on new housing development that happened. So not adding a bus stop itself, but actually expanding that transit line. For services, thinking about things like extending transit hours or increasing route frequency. And then programs, things like subsidized transit passes. And we'll talk a little bit more. This extends beyond just transit, but that was certainly a focus of some of the things we talked about with stakeholders. And so these different methods of reducing VMT, as I said, fall under one or more of the different program options that are listed on the bottom of the screen there. And just to note that fee-based is specific to capital improvement projects and wouldn't apply to the other 2, service or programs. Go to the next slide. So this graph is just meant to illustrate kind of how the 3 different program options fall regarding complexity and flexibility. And so things that we took into account as we move forward with choosing a type of program. So there's different trade-offs to each of them. I'll just kind of briefly share a little bit about each. So an impact fee program, it's pretty familiar, it's easy to understand. There's a lower administrative burden to administering that, but it can fund capital improvement projects, not the other 2, as I mentioned earlier. For a VMT exchange program, it's a bit more flexible. a moderate amount of administrative burden to maintain that list of VMT mitigation projects. It can fund all 3 capital improvement services and programs, but an applicant must fully fund a mitigation action themselves. They can't share it between applicants, so that can limit flexibility a little bit. And then lastly, a VMT bank is flexible in the type of projects that it can deliver, but it has the most administrative burden. And so there is, can split funding between different applicants to fund a project. So for example, to expand a transit route, that could be split between multiple development projects, the cost of expanding that route. And it can also fund capital service and programs, so all 3 types. So we are moving forward recommending an exchange. So why an exchange and not a bank? It's easier to start and maintain that exchange. And the main task to maintain the list of projects, VMT mitigation projects, that's the main thing that the administrator would be managing. And so that was a large consideration versus a bank, really more burden and needing to show how the money was used. Thanks, Dan. I see you went to the next slide. Yeah, so this kind of summarizes, we are recommending an exchange in part with everything that I just mentioned, different considerations of burden and other things of the different types of programs, but also the types of mitigation actions that we heard from our project TAC that they wanted to move forward with. So that, kind of ruled out a fee-based program because of the things that we heard folks wanted to explore in the county as options. So with that, I will pass it to Dan, who's going to talk more about the program.
Great. Yeah, and Kelly, thank you very much. Part of this project is to identify the types of VMT reduction projects. In this case, we're presenting them as 3 different categories: the capital improvements, services, and programs. That really understanding what those different VMT mitigation categories are and what would be desired to deliver in Sonoma County helped us to kind of land on an exchange. So there's an interrelationship between the types of projects that could be delivered and the program type that you would want to implement. So the next part of our presentation, and ultimately the core of the framework, which is a series of steps, is to step through what the VMT exchange could look like. So this you can think of as a demonstration. And we have 9 specific steps. Let's start with the program initiation, and then we'll step through each one of these just to give a sense of like how could this program start and ultimately operate from day to day. There's a first step, the program initiation. You do it once you have the program up and running, you don't need to reinitiate it, right? But there's also several periodic steps that we're going to go through. They're going to happen on a less frequent basis, maybe say a yearly basis or so. It's the core middle part of these steps that you're most likely to experience on a day-to-day basis when you are, as a lead agency, identifying VMT impacts and a VMT reduction need, and identifying the associated mitigation to implement. So there's several different kind of levels of time happening here. I wanted to illustrate that up front, but we'll jump into that first step of the program initiation. And so the first step really is for an administrating agency. And in this case, since we're talking about a VMT exchange, we can call that administrating agency a VMT exchange agent. If we were talking about a bank, a VMT bank, we can talk about a bank administrator. But their first step is to allocate funding and receive the appropriate approvals for establishing this program. There will be steps to develop the appropriate governing documents that outline and formalize the very specific processes. So you can think of what we're presenting today as kind of the overall framework. There would be more specific kind of legal documents that could take the form of an operating or purchase agreements between the participating agencies and the VMT exchange agent. Once you have the program in place, you can start to develop the VMT mitigation list. These are the different types of actual projects that a development could fund and have implemented. So this we can reference back to the types of projects will fall in the 3 categories of capital improvements, services, and programs. The VMT exchange agent will work in consultation with partner agencies to develop this list of initial projects, but it'll will also be performed and overseen by a VMT mitigation action review team. And it's an entity that would be charged with providing third-party oversight of the VMT mitigation action selection and evaluation process and overall program evaluation. It'll be a multidisciplinary group that could be housed within the VMT exchange agent or program sponsor or operate independently. The specific details, again, would be a part of a next more detailed step of the implementation. Once you have a list of VMT mitigation actions, the VMT exchange agent would estimate the cost and the amount of reduction potential. So you can see here, we're just illustrating different levels of potential VMT and associated cost. So 3 different actions, and we'll walk through how these could be used when the program's operating in the next couple slides. So there's the VMT reduction, and then there's the associated cost with it. With the TAC, we have spent time of figuring out, what kind of selection process of taking from a large number of ideas down to very specific VMT mitigation actions, and those steps are illustrated in the draft report. So we're up and running. We have lead agencies that have agreements with the VMT exchange, and they're now in the process of identifying VMT impacts for very specific developments. We've got 3 different developments with different levels of VMT reduction need, ranging from 50 to 100 VMT. The first development comes in, and they have their choice of 3 different developments, and they have a need to reduce 50 VMT. All things being equal, they're likely to select the lowest cost option for their VMT reduction need. So they have 50 VMT need. There's an option, 2 different options for 50 VMT on the list. Likely would pick the lowest cost one. So the developer working with the lead agency would ultimately pay for the mitigation action. How that money flows really depends on the VMT mitigation action. If it's a program or a service, the money may go directly from the development to the mitigation action for implementation. But there's also the scenario where the money might go first to the VMT exchange agent, especially if that VMT exchange agent is able to implement capital infrastructure. So they would then pass that money on to the implementing agency to fund the improvements. So there's different ways the money can move. Those details, we've identified those potential questions, and future legal documents would define the very specific nature. Development number 2 comes in. It also has a 50 VMT reduction. There's 2 actions left on this list. There's one that's at their 50, and it's the lowest cost of the 2. So they're likely to select that option. The money would move from the development to the mitigation action. The mitigation action would be implemented. Development number 3, the list, there's just one left. They have a need for 100 VMT, but what's left on the list is a reduction of 150, and it'll cost a little bit more. So in this case, this is one of the kind of challenges or limitations within a VMT exchange, is having increments of projects that match the increment of development. In this case, we run to the end of the list, and the last on the list and last one in the door would pay for that last one on the list. Now that's kind of an extreme example in terms of running the list down to just a last action. So there would be several steps, and again, these are the periodic steps where the lead agency this is the payment, just to show that that the mitigation action will be implemented. But then there's also several periodic steps that the VMT exchange agent will take. And this may occur like when the list gets low, down to the last one or the last few. It may be on a periodic basis, like annually. It really just depends on the processes, staff availability within the VMT exchange agent about how frequent this might be, and also how frequent development's happening, how quickly the list is being drawn down. So there's several steps. One is to evaluate the actions to confirm additionality. And additionality is a requirement for VMT reductions that are funded to demonstrate that it's only with that money that the VMT reduction would occur. This ultimately is a part of CEQA, really to identify the real and verifiable VMT reductions. So there's a follow-up process once the actions are implemented. There would be ongoing monitoring of the VMT performance of the actions. And in this case, the VMT exchange agent would do this monitoring and the reporting on the mitigation actions that have been delivered, their amount of effectiveness. This would be through a public process, facing document, for example, to demonstrate the outcome. Now, having this additional information about the performance of the mitigation actions that have been implemented could be a really good time to take the last step, which is to renew the VMT mitigation list. Go through the same process that we did earlier in this presentation of the mitigation action review team, reviewing that list, working with the VMT exchange agent to come up with new projects that reduce VMT and describing their costs to make them available to the lead agencies for mitigation. So that's the overall way that the exchange would work. We're calling this kind of the framework for the VMT exchange, so you can understand, kind of how the steps might work. And I'll turn it over to Chris for the next steps.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. So a lot of detail in there on how this would work. Hopefully walking through those diagrams kind of help lay it out a little bit better on how it works. So one of the immediate, a few immediate next steps that we're working on right now is the draft reports available now. So there's 40 or 50 pages of discussion and report, and then pretty large appendices with a lot of detail in the appendices. So definitely would recommend spending a little time with that first section and then looking through the appendices of interest. We're also working with our legal counsel on including materials in the appendices, focusing on, that piece of it, because there are going to be a lot of legal agreements that are going to need to be happening. This is really tied closely to CEQA. So our counsel is providing background on CEQA and how this would work under that framework as well. So draft reports out. So, take a look. If you have any feedback, questions, or thoughts, please get those back to me within the next 4 to 6 weeks. So just an outline of that report. In the body of the report, there's an exec summary. So maybe at least read that piece that gives a quick outline. That's maybe something you could send to other interested parties as well. So there's an introduction, overview of stakeholder engagement and consensus building. So that talks about the project TAC, the different stakeholder workshops that we held and interviews that we conducted, and feedback received there. A discussion of the framework, which Dan walked through today, and then conclusions. And just in summary, the conclusions are we're recommending a VMT exchange type framework with SCTCA as the exchange agent. So Dan, can you move on to the next slide? So there's a lot that comes after that. So later this summer, we are planning on holding another workshop that'll look at that process that Dan walked through. So we held a workshop earlier this summer that many of you participated in that kind of went through the steps in that process that Dan walked through as well. So how would this work with an agent? How would a developer and a lead agency kind of interact with it? So going through those diagrams and those steps that flow. So the second workshop is going to take those steps and that framework and take some conceptual example projects and walk those through the process. So how could this actually work in practice? So that's a way to stress test the framework, right? Like, let's plug something actual in here, try and go through the process, and where are there questions about how this is working, where is there more detail needed. So we've also, along with the project TAC, identified, starting out, we had a pretty long list of potential VMT mitigation items, 30 or so. So we worked with the TAC to come up with a criteria for kind of condensing that down. So some of the VMT actions that could show up in an exchange starting out include things like frequency or service improvements for transit, expansion of Redwood Bike Share or extending the time frame on that. Some of our TDM or travel demand management programs, affordable housing support, or free discounted fares on transit as well. So these are kind of some of the initial things that we could continue to examine for that initial list on that exchange. So to put that in the context of the steps Dan walked through, those would be those little kind of blue boxes on the outside that have the VMT reduction associated with them and a cost that the developer could come in and choose from that menu of items to offset their VMT. So these are some of the starting points we can continue to look at. And I see Ada, thank you for bringing up the question about affordable housing support. Let me go ahead and jump to this next piece, and then I'll talk about that a little bit. So after the second workshop and getting feedback on the draft report, we'll put together a final report that we'll bring to this committee, also the TAC and our board for acceptance. And that'll be the end of our current contract from Fair and Peers. And again, what we're expecting for this first phase is to finalize that recommendation, right? Is everyone on board with continuing to examine and exchange with SCTCA as the kind of administrator of that, and then have some recommendations for that first list that could show up on the list of mitigation measures. So that's the end of our contract with Fair and Peers. So there's a lot of additional work that'll need to happen that we don't have a grant for. So we need to fund that from SCTA funds or look for other grant opportunities to kind of fund some of this additional work. The first one that Dan mentioned is to have a program governance and guidance document. So going through what legal agreements do we need? How exactly do we add new VMT reduction items to that list? So all those details, right? How does the exchange of funds work, monitoring, what time period and cadence does that all happen? So this is a framework that we've worked on and kind of are recommending right now. There are a lot of details that need to be kind of fleshed out. So that's what that program governance and guidance document would dig into. And we work closely with our legal counsel on that to make sure we're meeting all the secret requirements, have some sample agreements in there, things like that. So it's not going to be free to run this type of program. So we need to come up with estimates of what it would cost to run it, to administer the program. So other similar types of programs have administrative fees associated with those exchange of funds as part of the mitigation. We need some resources to start up and initiate the program as well. So we need to figure that out still. We've established some criteria for selecting what shows up on the list of mitigations, but we need to dial that in some more and make sure everyone, finalize that. And, I think that could be a key piece of that, administrative governance and guidance document. And that includes coming up with an initial list. So we have a list right now that, a preliminary list that we can start, dialing in that could be included, but that needs to be approved and finalized and worked out the details and get agreements in place for those things. Next bullet is exactly that, establishing legal agreements with program participants. So that would be lead agencies. So, if the county were to participate, we'd need to have a legal agreement with the county. Affordable housing, transit agencies, we need to have those agreements in place. Need to figure out how to monitor and report out on the mitigation. So to make sure the VMT is actually being reduced and to report out on that on a consistent basis. So we could look into some other exchange type programs in other areas to get some ideas for how to do that. So, but we need to make sure we have a plan and a game plan for that. We may need to do secret review for an exchange. So we're still working with our legal counsel on needs there. And then we need to get some resources and actually kick it off at some point. So yeah, there's a ways to go, but we're further along than we were. We initially hoped we'd get to that end bullet when we started this program, but it's very complicated and a lot of legal issues involved. So yeah, we're happy we're at least getting to some initial recommendations and that we have kind of a path for moving forward on this. So the action that we're asking today, the PAC can't take action, but would just be to, let us know if you're on board with continuing to investigate an exchange with SCTCA as the program administrator. We want to make sure that everyone is thinks that's a good idea to keep looking at as we move into this demonstration phase and develop the final report. Ada did have questions about affordable housing. There are a lot of questions still outstanding about affordable housing. Ada, thanks for bringing that up. So there are questions about additionality and having the legal background and substantial evidence to demonstrate that affordable housing in the right places is actually contributing a significant VMT increase, or decrease. So our legal counsel has some questions around that. And there's also a lot happening at the state right now. So OPR, or the now known as the Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, so I left out a word there. There's some potential legislation in play right now that could set up a statewide bank focused specifically on affordable housing, so that HCD would administer. So we're watching that really closely as well. So there may be a few paths to help support affordable housing. And Ada, what it would, I think there are a few different ways that this type of exchange, Scott, I'm not sure if it's AB 30. I'll check on that and let you know. So Scott just chatted in a question there. So Ada, this could support affordable housing in a few different ways. It could provide infrastructure and programs in the vicinity of affordable housing projects to make them more competitive for other grant funding. So that's probably one initial way that this could support affordable housing development. But if we can work through some of these issues that we're grappling with right now, there's potential for some gap funding as well. That could be part of the either initial or the end funding gap there too. But still a lot we need to work out with our legal folks on how we could make that work. So that's where we're at right now. So we can't take action, but would love to at least get a thumbs up or see if there's support for that initial recommendation. And Jennifer, I see you have a question. So yeah.
Okay. Coming at it from the Valley perspective.
Yeah.
So Valley as a whole, with the workshop number 2 and the working through, I think it's really important to understand if projects are identified that are not in the Valley and we're contributing to projects, let's say 101 Smart area, is there the nexus there for
Yeah.
us with our stuff, right?
Yep.
Because otherwise it doesn't matter for us, for some question, it won't work.
Yeah.
The other is the rough proportionality
Yeah.
aspect. When we were just talking about, you know, if the project only needs 100 and they just paid for 150.
Yeah.
You know, that's basis now for them to come at us and be, you know, like, we just paid more than actually we should be required to pay.
Mhm.
So part of also looking at the different list of potential mitigations, I think we should look at actual projects that have been within the last couple of years since SB 743 has been put in, about what our mitigation efficiencies have been, you know, what our mitigation we put in, but also our VMT efficiency rather. So what are we looking for? You can have my hotel project in downtown Sonoma and have one of your case studies.
Mm.
I'm just trying to think through, like, what does that look like within actual projects that we've done recently,
Mm.
if we were to use one of those, because I'm just thinking a lot of the projects we have listed, that's more in the bank range than an exchange range, I'm wondering. So I just wanted to think that part of it through. It's like, what are the types of projects we're actually getting? So what is their BMT actual needs? And then right sizing whatever those projects are. Because some of my smaller projects, I could think, I don't know what I would contribute to if it was just a one choice.
Yeah, and you know, we're trying to have some scalable things in there that could be lower cost and larger cost to kind of provide opportunities for smaller and larger projects. But maybe I'll try to answer that second piece of the question and see if Dan has any comments on, you know, the nexus and rough proportionality. So I know our legal counsel is digging into that. So hopefully we'll have some answers to that, and I'll make sure he's aware of the concern around those areas as well. But for the second piece, it sounds like there are kind of a few different parts of that. One is looking at projects that have been implemented recently, what their VMT impacts, local mitigation that's been kind of done, and then looking at how effective that mitigation is. That's part of it?
I mean, I don't necessarily need that part of it. It's
Yeah.
more of like, where was our VMT numbers that we ended up creating mitigation around?
Yeah,
And so what, you know, what does that need?
yep,
So what are the types of projects that we're getting and what are those new numbers?
Yeah.
Because some of the things on the list, I'm like, oh, I would love to have more free fare.
yeah,
And, you know, to expand our free fare a little bit further into Void,
Mhm.
right, instead of just at the edge for his town. We pay for that as a city, but to have it extended farther, we want to do a shuttle downtown, you know, we're looking at different things that we'll need to partner with others, but what is that, again, rough proportionality to a project in our side town? Or any of the smaller towns too, these kind of bigger projects, you know, affordable housing. It's gonna take a lot of my projects.
Yeah.
Project,
yeah,
to be honest. Be where that's going, and I don't participate in red because the basis for any allocation of fund. We don't fall into any transit line that would actually qualify, so we don't contribute. So that's where I'm, you know, salary wise, I'm looking at it going, I have a harder time plugging in sometimes to the bigger program.
Yeah.
But I love
Definitely.
the idea of an exchange because I need something.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the questions, and yeah, you're highlighting a lot of the complexities here we need to work through, right? And I think it's a great idea pulling out some of those recent projects and what the actual number was, like what's the VMT number that needed to be offset, right? We have some of that information. So if anyone has some recent projects that you'd like us to kind of run through that demonstration workshop, let us know. We can use either that project or something like that project, right? Like a conceptual project based on it. So, yeah, Dan, maybe, do you have any comments on, you know, the nexus based on geography and rough proportionality? I know legal's looking into that a little bit.
Yeah, those are very important parts of a mitigation action. And one thing that we didn't say explicitly, but I do want to hear, is that this program can complement a local VMT mitigation program. So your local jurisdiction could have your own VMT mitigation program to deliver, the projects that you want in your city, jurisdiction, county. So this is, this can complement the overall program, so can help with some of that, if your development impact is here in one place and the mitigations in another place, you can have your local program to help with that. The how far the improvement could be away from, that's to be determined in the legal agreements. The kind of rough proportionality, that is one of the challenges of a mitigation exchange program. And as Chris had mentioned, having scalable projects, the number of passes that you fund, for example, is one way to ultimately scale to the right level. There can be capital improvement projects, that maybe are small and quick to implement, and that would be the particular focus of a next phase to make them small enough that they're constructible in that small form. But your note about some of the larger, kind of capital infrastructure ideas, for example, yeah, definitely a bank can be perhaps better if you're wanting to have multiple developments fund one large mitigation action. And just one final note is there are ways to create some crediting between the different developers, but that's one of those details to, is that okay? Should you do that? And then working from there.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks for highlighting that, hopefully these materials that we brought together, I mentioned to Noah that, this type of process could be implemented in a local jurisdiction as well. So if you wanted a local exchange, this material that we brought together, is hopefully a good resource to do something like that as well. So if that's a preference, yeah.
I had a question, piggybacking off Dan's last comment. So it sounded like in an exchange, multiple developers couldn't contribute to a single item. I was just wondering, what is the reason specifically? Like if, you had two projects, one was 60 VMT reduction, one was 40, why couldn't they combine and do 100 if that was one of the options?
Yeah. Dan, do you have let's see if Dan has a.
Yeah, I mean, the way the exchange is meant to work is it's kind of the development funds discrete tasks, right? Or mitigation actions. And there could be scenarios where maybe there is a need for a credit, some part of a project was implemented. So it's really meant to be discrete. And there may be some unique cases where you can have a credit system. But those are kind of the details that would need to be worked out.
Yeah, and well, I think part of it's just simplicity administration, right? Just lining up, a developer with a project, and that's it. There are two parties and the exchange agent, so it's a simple process. So, under a bank, you can have multiple developers just, pay into the pot, and then that gets distributed back out to projects. But there's a lot more administrative stuff that needs to happen, and so we're looking at starting small, and if that's working well, perhaps we could look at moving in that direction to have a little more flexibility that way.
I have a question about ongoing programs and how you would fund a program that may have a lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Yeah, we've thought a lot about that. We've talked some to the transit providers. They don't want just a 1-year shot of money. They can't improve service with money that's not consistent, right? So it'd have to be, funding 10 years of service, 20 years of service. So to have some certainty to keep something going. So all the analysis in the report, the draft report, is built on a certain period of improvements, not just looking at a single year.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll just add, I mean, from a CEQA perspective, if there's a VMT impact, you're mitigating it for the duration of the impact. So Chris answered kind of from the practical transit need, but there's also, you know, the life of the impact, and that could be 30 years, 50 years. It just depends.
Thanks.
Great. Are there any other questions from PAC staff? All right, is there any public comment? Not seeing any hands. Right, well,
Tom.
I was supposed to, oh, there you go.
Hi, Tom Conlon here, Sonoma Valley, member of the public today. Great to hear the progress reported today. This is an exciting development. I too share, Jennifer raised a number of good questions. Number of good questions have been raised around the table. My questions go to first the sort of the optimal scope and boundary for starting up this agent, this exchange agent. Initially, I was thinking that it should be broader to reduce administrative costs, to make sure that the range of implementation measures was sufficiently broad. But the more I think about it, and the complexity of setting this up, I think that SCTCA is probably the right scale for at least this stage of development of this idea. And I imagine that there's other jurisdictions around the Bay Area, around the state, that are contemplating something similar. The problem, of course, is we wouldn't want local developments taking their mitigation funds and using them in the Central Bay Area, for example. It wouldn't benefit us in Sonoma County at all. So I think there's something to be said for that, that this is the right scope and scale to start with. So that's the first comment. Obviously, this thing lives or dies, succeeds or fails based on the governance, measurement, verification, evaluation protocols that are set up. And that's the next stage. That's outside the scope of this current contract. But I think we can sort of, having this foundation to work from at this draft report stage and hopefully finalizing this, we're going to need to identify the pros and cons, and this may be also with support from legal, of in-house evaluation and oversight versus third party. And I think, Dan, when you introduced this, you've sort of blended those two together. And I think we're going to need to eliminate the fuzziness in that, because everyone wants to see this succeed. And it will be legal bulletproof if these protocols are set up in a way that provide confidence and trust to the developer community that's paying for it, but also to the public who is ultimately paying for it. If we don't mitigate climate change and the place burns down, we all suffer. So in the draft, as we finalize this stage, I'd like to see a little bit more work, and maybe some of this is in the appendix that I haven't read yet, but a little bit of work on how to set up some of that evaluation stuff. And there's complexity to this. There's naturally occurring changes in the market for transportation services, new technologies, vehicle miles traveled may ebb and flow based on COVID or other things that are outside the scope of mitigation. And so that it gets very complicated to measure additionality and then attribution to various programs versus other sources of effect. So, and then the final question really is, does the exchange agent, in this case SCTCA, assume responsibility for the risk of failing to achieve the estimated mitigation? Is the developer effectively transferring their mitigation responsibility to this agency? And what happens if we run for 5 years and it turns out to not actually move the needle? Or what if it overachieves? Does that mean we can reduce the prices to developers? So those are kinds of questions I have about, and it's a lot of this goes to legal and CEQA compliance. So that's preliminary comments. I hope to maybe sign some written comments in later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any additional questions? All right, well, I just want to say thank you to SCTCA staff and Fair and Peers for getting us here. I know it was a lot of work. And also all the thoughtful comments that came in today. I think personally, I see the kind of some of the CEQA challenges and issues that have been raised today as probably some of the most complex, frankly, to navigate. And so what I think would be helpful is if the various jurisdictions, members of the public, et cetera, could kind of prepare their list of questions and comments as they finalize their review of the documents, summarize all of them in some messages sent to SCTCA, who can share with the consultant, and then kind of have that stuff teed up for the second workshop conversation, because I think that's really where you guys have set a good framework for all of our understanding, and then now we get to try to talk about how it really be.
Yeah.
Great.
That sounds great.
Okay. Well, thank you again for everybody's hard work. And we'll move on to item number 4, equitable building action plan with Mr. Katz. One moment, please. I will come to the table. Thanks.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Let me test my clicker here. Great, this will work. So my name is BC Caps, Climate Programs Manager here with SCTCA. I'm here to present a brief update on our Equitable Building Electrification Action Plan that I've been working on for the last few months. And I believe I presented to this board or to this committee several months ago. So I wanted to bring a brief presentation today on some of our most recent work. Let's see, in an interest in time, I'm going to go ahead and move through my some of these slides rather quickly so that we can make sure to get kind of towards the present or towards the kind of the heart of the matter. So the presentation today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the causes of the problem, the scale of the problem, some of our solutions we've identified, the key levers that we're looking at, and then look at kind of some of our recommended actions. So basically, as a starting point, a lot of this work is grounded in our greenhouse gas inventory that we do here every 2 to 3 years. And this graph shows the trends of those greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 moving forward. You can see that we have a slight decrease over that time frame, just over a 20% decrease from 1990 to 2022. And then about 23% of our countywide greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to our building stock, and that is mainly energy use within our buildings. As we zoom in on that 23% just a little bit and think about what makes up emissions that come from our built environment, you can see, so this graph here shows electricity emissions in blue and natural gas emissions in orange. And you can see over the years that the blue is steadily and dramatically shrinking. That is our electricity emissions, and a lot of those reductions are specifically attributed to Sonoma Clean Power and them coming online, and really in general, the electrical grid, the electricity on the grid becoming much more clean. The troubling part is that orange bar that shows the natural gas emissions currently makes up about 77% of our emissions within the building sector. And as you can see over the years that has really not changed much. There's been some slight variations, but that it's really stayed steady. So thinking about the number of buildings, kind of the scale of the issue, and thinking about the kind of what the work that needs to be done to bring down emissions from the built sector. This is just a simple chart that really shows the distribution of buildings for each jurisdiction, with the large one at the end there being kind of the number of structures that are within the county, the unincorporated lands. And in general, we have about approximately 230,000 buildings that we're kind of thinking about how do we make improvements to those buildings to think about bringing down emissions. And so that's 230,000 is quite a large number of buildings to think about kind of the need to do kind of on a one-by-one basis. And it kind of shows the scale of the issue at hand. Within that 230,000, this is breaking down, showing the exact same numbers, but breaking it down by residential versus commercial, independent of kind of location in the county. And you can see there that I believe it's over 91% of the buildings within the county, within all of the countywide are residential buildings. And that leaves about 8 to 9% are commercial buildings. In general, commercial buildings do have higher emissions because of their more intense uses. But what we have kind of showing again, the scale of the issue that we're seeing that really the majority of the building count is 90% in residential. I have additional graphs that I'm not prepared to share today, or wasn't planning to share today, but it breaks down some of these same numbers, looking at not just building count, but looking at energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, kind of for each of these breakdowns. And the patterns are fairly similar. So then to bring down these emissions throughout our entire building stock, some of the measures that we would want to propose and have done at a large scale include things like upgrading furnaces to heat pump HVAC systems, upgrading hot water systems to heat pump water heaters, upgrading kitchen equipment to induction cooking and electric ovens. All of these really have to do with transitioning from natural gas usage to electric uses, and then continue to work with Sonoma Clean Power and others to continue to clean up the grid so that electricity that's being used is clean. There's improvements that can be made to pools and spas. In addition, the installation of PV photovoltaic solar systems and battery backup storage allows buildings at an individual level to really manage their energy much more. There's also then the need for much of these improvements. They will require electrical panel upgrades. Potentially and there are also measures that are available for if a panel is not, if capacity at a single building is not there's a restriction on that. There's ways to basically use what's known as a watt diet. It's so some switching equipment or other ways to kind of make that more manageable. There's also then the purchase of electrical vehicles, specifically ones that have the new bi-directional charging that allow one to do a vehicle to home charging and to use the batteries that are in the electric vehicle as a home, kind of as a backup battery for the house. And then these last two bullets are really, they're they're non-natural gas measures, but thinking about just improvements to energy efficiency that can be made to bring down the electricity, the energy that's needed in general. And then the last one is an interesting one because at the exact same time that one is doing all of these improvements to buildings, it's a perfect time to think about wildfire hardening and seismic safety improvements, and thinking about those as resiliency measures that could be done at the exact same time, really for economies of scale or just for those synergies that exist for being able to do that at the same time. So in thinking about actions that can be taken by SCTCA, by the county, by all of our member jurisdictions, we have been doing a survey and developing this action plan. And right now we're grouping our recommended actions into these kind of 5 larger priority areas. And then for each of these areas, we've identified kind of a strategic vision that we'd be aiming for. And so we have kind of in general, policy support is a big group, community education, energy equity, contractor workforce development, and then the actual building upgrades. So for each of those, the report that I'm working on, has kind of this strategic vision that lays out kind of where we're aiming for. And then there are some recommended actions. As part of the agenda packet that was distributed prior to the meeting, there's an excerpt from the report that I'm working on that has quite a bit of detail about each of these, much more detail about each of these. And then I'll work with Chris here to make sure that this presentation is posted to the website and shared to the committee. This next graphic, and it's kind of tough to see here in the room, but it's those same 5 priority action areas. And then it's showing that within each of the priority areas, we've identified between 3 to 6 different actions within each of those areas that we would like to kind of take on, that we'd recommend to be taken on and implemented over the upcoming years. And for the discussion today, I really wanted to zoom in on this priority 1 on policy support, because I think that's most applicable kind of to the Planning Advisory Committee and to the staff that we have here participating today. So again, within that area of policy support, I've broken that down into 5 kind of now sub areas, and thinking about specific actions that have to do with legislative and policy efforts, long-term program funding, permit fees and processes, energy reach codes, and home energy evaluations. So each of these then I'd like to step through rather quickly, and then talk about kind of what are some of our near-term implementation steps that we'd like to take. So one of the reasons I wanted to I'll distribute this document after the meeting is some of this text here on the screen is actually kind of rather hard to see. But in this first realm of policy, on this first realm of legislative and policy efforts, this table here is really showing kind of lead jurisdictions, partners, examples of work that's currently going on, and then some of the constraints that we're going to face. And so let me just go ahead and read. So for this first action, we're proposing to provide support for the adoption and implementation of legislative and policy efforts by local, regional, and statewide agencies that encourage building decarbonization and electrification efforts. And specifically then kind of identify 2 near-term implementation steps. The first would be to begin outreach activities to building owners and contractors on the upcoming Bay Area Air District requirements regarding the installation of zero-emission appliances for water heating and for space heating. And then while doing that kind of outreach, wanting to identify local implementation challenges and develop options to address them. For anybody, members of this committee may know, but if you don't, the Bay Area Air District has recently adopted proposed rules that will be coming into implementation in 2027 and 2029, which will restrict the heating, the sale of emission kind of non-zero emission appliances for water heating and space heating. And so this seems to be a major lever that is happening at the regional level for the entire Bay Area, of which we then are hoping to piggyback on as kind of a major effort. The second implementation action in this for this area is then to work with local jurisdictions to evaluate evaluate and adopt voluntary Cal Green measures that would encourage the replacement of air conditioners with heat pumps. A heat pump is basically an air conditioner that can do both heating and cooling. And so it's a very kind of a logical step that is a piece of equipment that's restricted to just air conditioning, burns out. Let's use those exact ducts. Let's use those same mechanisms, but let's replace it with a similar piece of equipment that does both heating and cooling for the house. So those are kind of our two in the direction of legislative and policy efforts as our first two near-term implementation steps. Moving on to long-term program funding. This is a huge issue given that many of these, all of these items are going to cost money. They're going to cost money for us at a kind of local government level to run and operate and implement. They're going to require large investments of money for building owners to make these upgrades. And so again, to read kind of the specific action we're proposing, this would be around coordinating efforts among local jurisdictions and other countywide agencies to develop stable long-term funding for expanded building electrification efforts countywide using an equity-based approach. Our first two near-term implementation steps would be to establish a staff-level working group to pursue state and federal grant opportunities. We're actually already starting these discussions, and we'll be hosting beginning to host a working group in August here to kind of start to dig in on this. And then also we have interest, the second implementation step that we have identified is to work with local social equity and health-focused community-based organizations to identify collaborative funding approaches. One thing I wanted to mention here, through the development of this report, we've been doing a fairly robust community engagement process where we've met with a number of social equity groups and health groups, and they're the kind of like looking at the synergies between climate impacts, energy, equity, and health. There seems to be quite a ripe area there for us to really thinking about long-term funding options. Moving on to the third action on permit fees and processes. What we're proposing here is to work in partnership with local jurisdictions, existing community roundtables, existing countywide roundtables, and regional resource providers to evaluate the potential permitting changes to further support and simplify the installation of zero-emission building systems in existing buildings. Near-term implementation steps would be to evaluate local permit processes and fee schedules for consistency and identify areas for the adoption of best practices from case studies. And the second step would be to investigate opportunities to link financial assistance and technical assistance to the permitting process to discourage unpermitted building decarbonization projects. One of the key issues that's been identified locally as well as kind of statewide is that a number of these upgrade projects ended up being done without permits, basically to just kind of do the work under the table to reduce costs. And by really tying any incentives that are given to the permitting process, we're hoping that that may be a lever to really encourage homeowners and contractors to really do the correct thing, pull the permits, and actually then step forward through that process. Fourth is work we'd be proposing to do on energy reach codes. And now I have to admit that this is one because of current state legislation and kind of federal energy policy. This is one that is complicated. And so at this point, what we're proposing is to evaluate the adoption of fuel neutral energy performance reach codes for new construction that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve indoor air quality, and assist with reaching our carbon neutrality goals. Specifically, that would entail developing a list of potential code-oriented options available to local jurisdictions following the state legislative session in October 25. There's currently a bill, AB 306, I believe I have that number correctly, which would restrict in many fashions the establishment of building reach codes by local jurisdictions. And really this whole action area may end up being dependent upon what the state legislature and the governor decide upon for that bill. The second item here would be identify local jurisdictions with interest in exploring reach code options and develop coordinated outreach approach for adoption. A lot of this work would really be coordinated through the Bay Area Regional Energy Networks Codes and Standards Program, and a lot of work that's being done at the region and statewide level with kind of figuring out how to navigate that ability for building reach codes for jurisdictions that want to move in that direction. And the last one I wanted to highlight here, our fifth and final action here has to do with home energy evaluations. And we'd like to develop this. A lot of this is actually based upon recent work at the city of Berkeley and following their lead. This proposal is to develop a model ordinance for jurisdictions that require owners of existing buildings to conduct a home energy score evaluation prior to listing the building for sale, and to provide a summary of the most recent evaluations to prospective lessees and buyers. So to move forward on this, we'd want to meet with the jurisdictional staff to discuss building benchmark programs, building performance standards, and specifically the Berkeley model ordinance that's related to the time of listing. And then lastly, the last item here would be to coordinate feedback sessions with local real estate representatives to review this Berkeley model ordinance, identify perceived concerns, and develop potential workarounds. Inserting energy upgrades or energy upgrade information as part of the building sale process has been something that has been contentious in the past, but this recent City of Berkeley model ordinance is actually, I think, has a lot of potential. So those are the 5 action areas that are the 5 actions specifically that are within the policy support section of this report. And so that's kind of what I wanted to highlight today. Thinking about next steps that we're going to be taking over the next couple of months. Obviously, we're presenting to the Planning Advisory Committee this meeting here today. I'll be giving a very similar presentation to our Climate Action Advisory Committee in July, followed by an update report to our Board of Directors also in early July. We'll be completing the administrative draft for review this summer and having that reviewed by our staff advisory group members and our equity and technical advisors through July and August, with the hope for final approval of this report by our Board of Directors in September. And then starting on near-term implementation actions in this fall, going into 2026. And as I mentioned earlier, in relation to, say, funding, some of that work that's needed no matter what. And so we're already starting to move forward on those. So that's what I had to present today. Thank you. And we can take some questions, but depending upon time, I'll leave it to you as to how you want to progress.
Yeah, quickly, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Capps on his presentation?
I have some questions, comments, I guess. As a homeowner whose air conditioning just died, and is switching to a heat pump, and their roof is also going out, and having to get solar all at the same time, just knowing that all of this is going to be extraordinarily expensive. Yes. And we've been told that all federal incentives will be gone by the end of the year. So I would highly recommend examining how to make this as administration proof as possible going into the future, whether it was good or not. Because without it, there's just no way we would ever be able to cover all this. And a lot of houses are probably in the county are hitting that point where everything is starting to go out on them. So this is a really good time to be examining that. And just another idea too, I'm still tapped into some architecture circles, and a lot of places are going petroleum free in housing. So no petroleum-based plastic products or insulation. So it prevents a lot of off-gassing and just microplastics and all of that stuff. So that might be a good angle to look into.
Very good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Great comments. Does anyone on Zoom have any comments or questions for Mr. Capps? Looks like we have a hand raised.
Chris.
Hey, Steve. Thanks, Tom again. Quick question. You mentioned that permit compliance is really low. Is there any value to perhaps a permit amnesty program concept to encourage folks that may have completed some of this work already without permits. Is there any real benefit to either the homeowner or to the jurisdiction in getting those folks to comply? Just something to think about.
Great, thank you, Tom. I do think a lot of the kind of policy and programs will be kind of cross jurisdictional throughout the department. So a lot of these are going to be building specific. So I think making sure we have the right staff engaged as SCTA moves through this will be critical for success. But I think I like your approach of the kind of breaking it up into bite-sized pieces and then starting with the policy work. I think that's a good approach. And the comment about looking for amnesty programs, you know, the state has prioritized that for ADUs, and I do think there's some benefit. Although if somebody already installed a natural gas water heater, we may not want to give them amnesty on that for this, but I do think it's a good point to raise.
Very good.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you all. And there are much more details. All of this information is included in that board packet, and I'm happy to take any written comments if anyone here has time to review the work, and certainly then I'll incorporate that as part of the next draft. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Capps. And we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is an update on the comprehensive transportation plan with Mr. Garcia.
Just quick. Thank you. Yep. All right, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. Thank you all. I'm Adam Garcia, data analyst with SCTCA. Just here to give a brief presentation on our Sonoma County travel model forecast update, and as well as the CTP plan update as well. All right, great. Cool. So just a few things to highlight real quickly. Moving forward, this will be for the travel model scenarios. We're looking at our 2023 existing conditions as well as MTC's Plan Bay Area 2050 plus projections. There are some notable population estimate differences between what the census is showing us and what MTC's Plan Bay Area is showing to be considerably higher. Trying to be consistent with the land use projections, but also considerate of what's actually real on the ground. We'll come back to this, but likely more focus on trying to keep the population estimates closer to the US Census. For our travel model results, we've identified a few discrepancies, irregularities in these results. So these are still draft, but just to give you an overview, these are included in your agenda packet. But just to note that these will be revised and are in process of being revised for the 2050 results. The 2023 should be consistent with the past reviews, but if you do find any irregularities in those, please definitely get in touch with us and we can do some adjustments. So again, these are all in your packet. They are subject to change, but just to go through these very quickly, obviously can't read all of those numbers, but you can look through them in your packet in more detail, just considering the time. Just to highlight that the 2050 estimates are assuming that new housing construction will continue and attract new residents, but also that job growth will continue. If for some reason that population growth as predicted by the California Department of Finance isn't growing, just likely due to recent impacts from the fire, but also lower immigration impacts, that could create more of an imbalance in our jobs housing balance within Sonoma County, thereby increasing VMT. So continuing to to grow both in housing and job will hopefully have greater balance and reduce VMT when we can have people working and living in the county. And then moving on to the CTP vision goals. This is just a quick overview of the goals, which you've likely seen before, and then the performance measures that we're going to be going into more depth at a future meeting to evaluate the scenarios. These are the 4 scenarios that we will be comparing. The existing conditions as they stand right now, but also then what if there is that no growth scenario? So showing existing conditions, but then all those CTP projects, and then showing the planned Bay Area growth, both with the CTP projects and without. Just initial results are showing that some of the highlights that there are, based off the adopted active transportation plans, our expanded bicycle facilities will nearly triple. With the CTP projects, also there's a lot focused on increased transit use, so higher ridership. With job growth and housing growth with projected populations, there is anticipated to be increased VMT and more congestion, but the congestion would likely reduce slightly with CTP projects. And then also identifying that there is anticipated to have reduced transportation related GHG emissions, just as vehicle fuel economies are expected. And so next steps, we'll be finalizing the Planned Bay Area 2050 forecast. Also coming up later this year, we'll be working with jurisdictions on their 2050 general plan build-out scenarios. We'll be going through next year likely a validation of the travel model, and then also doing an update to the travel behavior study, which we just came out with last year as an update, just trying to show more sensitivities to the different modes of travel, particular walking, biking, and transit. And then the next CTP, which should happen next in about 5 years. This is a light kind of update right now, just mainly focused on updating the project list, the CTP project list, but we will be at the next CTP iteration considering changing some of those performance measures that I had highlighted earlier before. So with that, I'll stop the presentation and pass it back to Chair.
Excellent job with your presentation, being concise. I know we're running a little bit short on time today. Is there any questions from the PAC members? We'll start with questions. No? Members of the public? No? All right. Mr. Garcia, I appreciate the metrics. I haven't had a chance to really get through them all, but I do like seeing those metrics and the projections. I think that's super helpful for all of us to utilize as we start to think about how travel is going to be flowing around the county. So it's a great job and really appreciate the model.
Thanks.
So we will move on to item 6 on our agenda, and that is Ms. Turi.
You know what? All right, we'll get started while Chris pulls this up to share it. So I'm going to be presenting to you the draft recommendations from the mascots effort, which is the Marin Sonoma Coordinated Transit Service Plan. You see here the logos of the 9 participating agencies. That's 6 transit operators and the 3 funding agencies, SCTCA, the Transportation Authority of Marin, and MTC. This is a collaborative partnership to advance cost-effective transit ridership recovery and growth in the North Bay, and specifically Marin and Sonoma. Next slide. I'll start by giving you an overview of the effort as a whole and the key findings from the existing conditions analysis, and then present the draft recommendations and conclude with next steps. Next slide. So we embarked on this effort last year to comprehensively evaluate transit in the 101 corridor. And this is an opportune time because this type of comprehensive assessment has not been done since SMART came on service or since the pandemic changed travel patterns. This effort is focused on transit services along the Highway 101 corridor and primarily on regional services. It's grounded in post-pandemic travel and work patterns. And there are three primary goals: to grow ridership, so improve service efficiency, effectiveness, and legibility along Highway 1 corridor, to better serve existing and future transit customers, to work as if there were one agency, so approaching planning as an operator neutral exercise to determine what services best serve existing and future customers, and to develop a plan, not a study, so mascots will directly inform service changes. Next slide. So this was a process grounded in data that intended to be near term, something that could feasibly be implemented next year, and is not a long-term visionary project. We started last summer with gaining a deep understanding of current ridership and travel patterns, hired a consultant with support from MTC to get an objective third-party perspective on service in the corridor. We developed a series of solutions that were thoroughly discussed with staff and the general managers, and we also conducted a technical evaluation of the options that informed the recommendations that you'll see here today. We're coming to you before going to the public to get input on recommendations this summer, and our goal is to adopt final recommendations this fall and implement in early 2026. Next slide. So some of the key findings that are the foundation of our recommendations include, SMART has really replaced Golden Gate Transit Route 101 as the predominant passenger choice for regional interest Sonoma County and Sonoma to Marin County trips. Route 101 is redundant with SMART in Sonoma County throughout much of the day, although there are gaps in the SMART schedule that 101 has been filling. So Highway 101 in Southern Marin is overserved, too many bus routes carrying too few riders, which is inefficient and can cause customer confusion. Most travel to San Francisco originates in San Rafael or further south, and local services should have stronger and more direct connections to Feed Smart. Next slide. In developing the service proposals to respond to these findings, there were a few key themes of what we're trying to do. First, reduce duplication, so more frequency on fewer options, which aids further better rider understanding and usability of the network. It also optimizes the use of resources by removing overlapping services, which may be redundant. Second, improve connections. Improved frequency can also improve connections between services. And finally, put service where ridership potential is the greatest. This means removing low ridership segments and repurposing those resources in areas where ridership demand is higher. Next slide. So the biggest move of the mascots recommendations are here. Currently, SMART and Golden Gate duplicate each other between Santa Rosa and San Rafael, and this is not an optimal use of resources. The recommendation is to discontinue the 101 service, Golden Gate 101 service north of Novato, where ridership is the weakest and where SMART ridership is growing rapidly. To accomplish this and still provide riders adequate service, we do need to increase SMART service span and frequency. Mascot's recommendation is to go from 42 weekday trips on SMART to 48, and from 16 weekend trips to 24. This will achieve evenly spaced and at least hourly frequency all day, and on weekends, on weekdays, hourly frequency, and then on weekends, and also backfill the 101 service that would be lost. So these recommendations represent a 14% increase in weekday service on SMART and a 50% increase on weekend day service, which is an overall 19% increase in service for SMART. The Golden Gate resources saved would be reinvested in more Golden Gate 101 service between Marin County and San Francisco, which is where we are seeing the greatest demand into San Francisco. And this improved frequency also makes it easier for smart riders to transfer to the 101 at the San Rafael Transit Center for trips into San Francisco. And for some Sonoma riders, they will also be able to transfer from SMART to the 101 or to the ferry in Marin County to reach San Francisco. In Sonoma County, this will be a reduction in span of service to the current 101, meaning that the very late night service would no longer be available. But there's been very low ridership on those late night. What I'm talking about is kind of like 10 p.m. till midnight. And there's virtually no agency in peer areas operate services late. It would also require San Francisco bound riders to transfer to the 101 or to the ferry to get to San Francisco using the outside of the commuter service. So consolidating regional service between Novato and Santa Rosa provides faster, more reliable, regular connections between Sonoma and Marin counties. Next slide. This is really focused on Marin bus service, so I won't get into a lot of detail here, but essentially there's many recommendations to streamline service and provide more frequency on key routes in Southern Marin. Next slide. So with SMART as the mainline connection along Highway 101 in Sonoma, Marin, and in between the two counties, it becomes even more important to make strong direct connections from local bus services to SMART stations. Petaluma Transit, Santa Rosa City Bus, Sonoma County Transit, and Marin Transit should all implement schedule changes and route realignments to make strong direct connections to SMART stations. It's worth noting that Sonoma County Transit already rerouted Route 20 from the Russian River area in Sebastopol to serve SMART directly. And this has gotten some really positive feedback from riders. Petaluma Transit is also increasing frequency on routes 2 and 11 to 15-minute frequency, which both feed SMART stations in Petaluma. That is, I believe, being implemented the end of this month. So fairly shortly here. And most of the local bus changes identified in these recommendations are designed to be revenue hour neutral, so no new funding needed. Next slide. Generally, commuter buses are currently serving the purpose they're designed to serve. However, some tweaks are warranted. First, there are 3 commuter services in Sonoma County, so run by Golden Gate Transit. The 164 has very low ridership, and those hours should be reinvested in more frequent 172 service. The 172 goes from Santa Rosa down into San Francisco. And then the 172X, which is an express of that service, only operates 2 trips in the peak hours. And so combining these into one service that operates more frequently will make the service easier to understand and to use. This new combined route would stop making local pickups in San Francisco to save time for riders with the longest distance to travel. And I'll just also note that opening up of the Marin Sonoma Narrows piece in northern Marin County will also speed up that service and make that commute time shorter. The combined route will offer greater frequency in the later morning and in the earlier, and as well as create an earlier afternoon trip. And during the very peak service, there'll be 15-minute headways. Next slide. Again, this is kind of really focused on Marin, but there's some recommendations to streamline the route 580 in Marin County to speed up travel time. Next slide. So to summarize, there's 5 core recommendations for SMART and Golden Gate Transit 101 service, discontinue Golden Gate 101 north of Novato and increase frequency between San Rafael and San Francisco. Increase SMART frequency and extend the span of service. In Southern Marin bus service, streamline routes between San Rafael, Marin City, Sausalito, and San Francisco. For local bus connections to SMART, improve the local bus connections with strong direct connections to SMART. For Golden Gate, commuter routes in Sonoma combine into a single alignment with improved frequency and restrict San Francisco local travel to reduce travel time. And then for Golden Gate Route 580 in San Rafael, follow the 580X alignment to improve travel time. All right, next slide. To summarize the new post-mascot service structure along the 101, including what roles each service is intended to provide, SMART becomes the primary Sonoma Marin regional service provider. Golden Gate provides all-day service from key ridership hubs along the 101 within Marin County. Golden Gate provides peak commuter bus service from Sonoma and Marin counties direct to San Francisco. And Golden Gate continues to provide strong ferry connections to and from SMART to connect to riders to San Francisco. Sonoma County local operators directly connect to SMART, and Marin Transit provides local service along Highway 101 and connections to regional SMART, ferry, and Golden Gate services. Next slide. So for customers, that means a network that's easier to understand and therefore use. More frequency makes every line more useful and makes connections easier because perfect schedule coordination is less necessary. Improved regional connections with better SMART service and more usable, understandable service into San Francisco from the highest demand areas. Most regional trips will have lower fares than current, and a simpler, more frequent network that has better connections will increase ridership. Next slide. For transit operators, these changes are projected to increase ridership by 8 to 15%. Those increases vary by location and operator, but overall the number of trips made on transit is projected to increase. Ridership increases are the highest on SMART and Golden Gate 101 and Southern Marin. The bus changes were designed to be revenue hour neutral and should not require significant new resources. No major capital improvements are needed to implement this plan. And the recommendations do require some resources to increase SMART service and frequency to backfill that 101 service. And we will have to do our due diligence on rider communications and outreach to ensure that there's an understanding of these changes and people easily understand the alternatives with the new services. Next slide. So there are riders who will be impacted by these changes. I think we're one back, sorry. Could you go here we go. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're good here. Thank you. But the vast majority of riders will have a comparable or better alternative that will get them to their destination at the same time of day, comparable or faster travel times. A small number of riders will need to change the time of day they travel, you know, and where they access their bus. So I guess next slide. Okay. Essentially, the presentations are happening today at Golden Gate's Transit Committee in here, and that kicks off public outreach. Within a couple of weeks, there should be a website live with a survey that will be heavily directed toward riders on all services included in this. And that will go through August. And this plan will be presented to the boards and committees of all agencies involved throughout that timeframe. And with that, happy to take any questions or feedback.
Great, thank you, Ms. Turi. Are there any questions from PAC members? How about online on Zoom? I don't see any hands. Any comments? Oh, yes, sir.
Anna, have you considered running for president or mayor or something? Because this is the best news I think I've heard meeting around this table in a very long time, not since free bus service in New York City seems to be very politically popular right now. Outstanding, 8 to 15% ridership increase with no increase in existing funding and no capital investment. I mean, this is a home run by all reports.
Thank you. I'd like to take credit for it all, but
Yeah, I'll just concur on that. I think taking the time to really look at transit as a single service, great work, and I think the results speak for themselves, being able to do that. I was initially concerned over the proposal to reduce the Golden Gate routes, but then backfilling that with commuter, I think basically would solve the concern or address the concern. I do think we need to continue to try to increase the convenience to get to smart access and dealing with the parking and last mile challenges, including to the ferry. And then I would just add that using the input from the rider survey to finalize these changes would probably be, the way to even kind of level up or meet some of those projections. All right. Well, that concludes item 6 on our agenda. Thank you, Ms. Turi. Regional updates from MTC June monthly bulletin, item 7.
So just provided this for information. So Ada joined us for a little bit on Zoom. So I'm sure if you have any questions about the report, please reach out to Ada.
Okay, perfect. And then we have a standing updates discussion from our members. I'll just jump in. I don't have anything to update. We're very busy in Cotati, but I don't have anything specific to talk about. I do feel like some of our projects are in an odd kind of stall period, or maybe circling while they're trying to figure out how to proceed. And uncertainty, I think, has been the word of the quarter. And so hopefully as we get into summer, we're getting a little bit of traction, and I am still getting calls for new projects. So I think the economics are still holding, but people are kind of trying to reevaluate how to move forward with projects. It's generally what I'm seeing. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything.
I think right now I'm getting a lot of calls and just trying to see how to do anything with what they have, and a lot. Study for the project for our safety element. Good luck to everybody.
Ellen or the county, you guys have anything you want to update?
I mean, we've seen a slight slowdown these past few months too. We seem to be ramping up. We have a lot kind of in the pipeline, but need the application and the money to proceed. So in the meantime, I've been SB9 ordinance, SB 684, 11.3. So kind of got those things out of the way, which was nice. And the small dual, but it seems like we'll be picking up again back in.
We've got a couple things. We are wrapping up the outreach or the first portion of outreach for our new general plan. Getting mostly just talking to the public, seeing what do you want in the new general plan. We will be presenting that to our board and they can give us direction on actually writing some policy in the next couple of years, which is exciting. In addition, the airport specific plan process is kicking off again, so stay tuned to that. Our EJ, environmental justice and equity elements are coming forward as well in the very near future. So making progress on that, and then our housing is plugging away still a few thousand units, all about to kick off into EIR stage, so. Continue to read about us in the papers.
Yeah.
Specifically me.
I forgot to mention that I started releasing the elements, draft elements for our general plan. So we've done noise, and local economy. The next two I'm releasing in the next few weeks is going to be circulation and our open space. So they will be all available by August.
Great, going online, any of our online participants have any updates for the pack? All right, so I don't know if, do we need an update from the SCTA board?
Just included, board agenda packet and our planning activity report, so just information.
Yep, all right. We've been taking public comment along the way, but I'll open it up since we have a standing item on our agenda. Okay, item 10 is adjournment, and I will ask, I think I'd appreciate an update on the status of TOC implementation. We've had a lot of input on how to comply and implement, but I'd like to get a kind of a roundtable discussion going. We're in the middle of that in Katati, and so I just look for economies of scale in places we might be able to help each other out on a future pack. agenda.
Yeah, and ABAG is asking to, I think, come back to the group in August with an update on the policy. So maybe at our meeting next month, we could do a roundtable on implementation and get some questions together for ABAG for August. Does that sound good? Okay.
Have you been reached out to by the group that was interested in collaboration with the farm worker housing? Just curious.
Yeah.
I know we have, but I'm wondering.
We have not.
Okay. Meeting adjourned.
All right, great.
You have time.
I don't know. Maybe it's not good.
No, I don't know. Anybody?